And I wanted to talk this morning about the one thing, after a weekend of planning and listening and praying and coming up with goals or next steps or new initiatives or innovative and creative ideas, I wanted to just leave a final word this morning on our weekend, trying to talk about the one thing that matters most of all in our current cultural moment. And I'm going to do that by just continuing on with Paul's, with what Paul is saying in this 1 Corinthians. He makes this case. Remember where you were, not of noble birth. Remember from where you were called. And God is choosing the fools to shame the wise. He's choosing the weak to shame the strong. He's choosing things that are not to actually nullify things that are. And he goes on to talk a little bit practically like how that looks. And in chapter 2, he just says, and so it is with me. After making this argument, he says, and so it is with me. Brothers and sisters, when I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God, for I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Christ and Him crucified. I came to you in weakness and with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. Would you pray with me for a minute? God, we submit to you again today. We listen to you again today. We come and we surrender to what you have for us, to the way you want to lead, to the direction you want to send us, to the word you want to speak. We surrender. And we will not push back the lifting and the encouragement you want to give us by our insecurity. We will not push back. We'll receive it. And we also will not push back the challenge or the correction. We'll push back our own pride. We'll receive from you, Jesus. So bring us revelation. It's in your name. Amen. Now, typically, everybody in the room has like a passage we hand it out to you on your way in right before you get your coffee, and we all take 5 minutes to read the passage, and then we have like a Bible study in groups, and then we have a big dialogue. That's typically how things go. We're not going to do that this morning. I'm going to jump in. I've just got like a little sermonette here this morning, and I just said sermonette, and some of you are like, it ain't going to be a sermonette. You don't even know. I have an attempt at a sermonette this morning, and I just have kind of been discerning through the week what's maybe like an important word for our community in this moment, and what's maybe like an important thing that the Lord wants us to hear before we kind of go into a fresh season of missionary leadership. So if you'd let me jump in. Last year when USF was, University of South Florida, just across the street, USF InterVarsity was doing outreach, new student outreach. You got 40,000 students on campus. Half of them are like moving in and trying to reset their lives. And so InterVarsity just goes crazy for like 2 months, as does every campus ministry. Campus Crusade, Navigators, Young Life, Campus Outreach. There's just kind of like this wild time where it's just like direct outreach, trying to do what is it, the bull market or something like that, setting up at the bull market, trying to like reach people, set up tables, go talk to people. And I just thought, hey, what if myself and some of our staff, what if we just go help as much as we can that week? So I went out, but I had like a couple hours free. I just went and found an InterVarsity table, and I just said, hey, and I used to be on InterVarsity staff. I used to be a part of an InterVarsity chapter. I was on staff for 3 years up in Illinois. So I kind of feel like I know the drill. I know what's going on here. Like I can just hop in and be of great service to you. Sure, yeah. So I just show up at this table and I say, hey, give me a pack of contact cards and give me a pen, and then give me some of your brochures and stuff. I'll just go walk around. I'll just meet with people, talk with people, see if people are interested. If they're interested, I'll have them fill out a contact card. I'll bring back all these contact cards or whatever. So I go out for 2 hours, and I'm just having all these conversations on campus. I'm just trying to meet with people, and I'm literally just starting out the conversation like, hey, are you new on campus? Are you interested at all in getting involved in a Christian fellowship? Are you interested? Because it's not really, I'm used to like first couple weeks not really necessarily being in like get in a spiritual conversation mode. I'm just kind of like, are you at all interested in getting involved in a Christian fellowship? We exist. We'd love to walk with you. If you're not, it's fine. It's no problem. So I'm running around with all these contact cards, and like almost every conversation I get in, the moment I say, are you interested in getting involved with a Christian fellowship? It's just like direct hostility. It's not like, no thanks, appreciate the offer. It's like, what is actually wrong with you? What is actually wrong with you? Why would you even ask? Why do you exist? Why have you believed such things? May I talk to you about the insanity the Kool-Aid you've drank for a minute, you know? I got into like quite a few. I mean, there were some people who were like, nah, put the headphones in, no thanks, like move on. And then there was some hostility. I had like one or two good conversations or whatever. Now for me, that's like I'm not used to that. That's a bad ratio for me. I was on staff in like from 2011 to 2014, and that's not what I experienced in 2011 to 2014. It's not what I experienced when I was in campus ministry from 2007 to 2011. Not that bad of a ratio. And I remember coming out of that 2 hours, I came back to the hub, and I saw a couple of people. I think I saw Stacy Gaskins. I might have saw like Leanne or something like that, and they were just like, are you okay? Because I just looked depressed. I got back to, they're like, are you okay? What just happened? And I was like, I just went on campus, and I think I need prayer ministry. I think I need counseling. I don't know what's going on. I remember telling a couple people, like, I think what I'm experiencing, I've been off campus for a while, and I think what I'm realizing is that, I've been off campus for a while, and I think I'm coming into a visceral reality that is not surprising at all for any of those students who are working those tables, is not surprising at all for any of those staff, but I've been out for 5 years, and I'm coming back in. It's not normal for me. And realizing that there's far less spiritual interest than ever, and far more animosity than ever on campus against a Christian worldview and Christian ethics and values. And then I started reflecting. I've been doing neighborhood ministry now for almost a decade with my wife, some in Illinois, some here. Some of it's different, but some of it's similar, and just realizing, I think it's also probably true that there's less spiritual interest in the neighborhood now than ever, and some more animosity than ever. And there's less spiritual interest in the break room and in the cubicle and in the conference room at work, and more animosity than ever. There's less spiritual interest in the coffee shops and the bars and the parks than ever, and sometimes more animosity. Do you feel that in your microchurch, in your ministry, in your missionary life? Do you feel that sense of cultural decline? And I don't necessarily mean like cultural decline in terms of like a brand, a certain brand of Christian values, or a certain brand of like American cultural Christianity. I just mean a certain decline in like the hunger and the presence of God, the curiosity, the spiritual interest, the hunger for the manifest presence of God. Hope, openness. It's almost like this Christian impulse and the hunger for God has been in just a slow drip decline. And it almost can feel like it's just a never-ending, inevitable decline that we're in the midst of. And we're trying to figure out, what does it mean to be a faithful leader, a faithful Christian witness, a faithful microchurch leader in the midst of a cultural moment like this? And there's a breadth of data to support that feeling that we have, that like objective observation that we have. There's just about anything Barna produces, anything like Christianity Today does some kind of research, about anything they produce, you can see a decrease in biblical literacy, a sharp decrease in the amount of people who say they pray regularly or read their Bible regularly, a sharp decrease in people who have some kind of religious affiliation or church affiliation, a sharp increase in churches that are closing, and the rise of what's called the nones, or the religiously unaffiliated, and the rise of atheism. And I think we all share that intuitive sense, but we have different perspectives maybe on what is happening. We have maybe different perspectives on how to see the current cultural moment as leaders, as missionaries. And because we have different perspectives on what's happening and how it's happening, we actually have different ways of considering how we respond to it. What does it mean for us? What does it mean for like a missionary right now in this current time? How do we respond to it? What does it mean to be a faithful witness in this kind of moment? And I actually think the current nature and the future of our witness depends on our perspective of this moment that we're in. And some of us can deduce from this feeling of decline that at one point in time, maybe it was like in 300 when Constantine was in power and he basically made everybody be Christian, but at some point in time in the past, everybody was Christian. Like everything was, everybody's a part of church or whatever. And everything has just been like in this slow, like very direct kind of like line of descent ever since some previous time. And we're just maybe like stuck right in the middle of it. Like we're just, it's just catching us right here, and it's just going to be this inevitable decline, and we're just trying, and there's going to be like a little remnant of people over here, and at some point Jesus is going to return and make all things right, and that's our view of what's happening the moment that we play in it and our response to it. But if you actually look at the history of global Christianity, not just like this country or Western Christianity, if you look at the history of global Christianity, that's not actually how it looks at all. Actually, the history of global Christianity looks a little bit more like a boom or bust economy. It looks like there's just this like wave diagram where you have these like renewal moments, these mass globalized renewal moments of the manifest presence and power for God, hunger for God, desperation for God, taking over like whole countries, whole regions, moving across the globe. And then you have like decreases on the way down where people, something is happening that we'll talk about where there's this decline in openness or concern or hunger for or desperation for, and therefore the presence of, the manifest presence of the power of God coming into decline. But then eventually there's this uptick again, over and over and over again. And if you give me a minute to maybe try to defend that position, just a minute, just give me 1 minute, let me just mention a few historical examples of Christian revival in the last 300 years. You've got the First Great Awakening in 1727, spurred on by leaders like Zinzendorf and John Wesley and Jonathan Edwards. But that movement was marked from the very beginning, from its very like organic beginnings, it was marked by a strange people who the world could not make sense of, who were committed to passionate prayer and committed to a white-hot faith, a passionate faith, an on-fire faith, and dependence on God, desperate for God's presence. Not long after that, and that whole movement came out of coming right out after the Revolutionary War. So before the Revolutionary War, you have actually a huge decline. This like that you can read stuff about there being just like sexual ethics were just like all over the place. You've got stuff about like drunkenness just all over the place. You've got like zero concern for a Christian worldview. And then you have the Revolutionary War happen, and suddenly, coming out of the Revolutionary War, you've got people who are hungry and suffering and desperate, and they're all the things that they put their hope in, the worldview that they put their hope in, everything they put their hope in was failing them. All of my hopes actually have no answer for what's happening right now. And suddenly, when all things that we've hoped in failed, all of a sudden there's this uptick, and people are hungry for God, desperate for God, looking for God. Then you've got the Second Great Awakening in 1780 coming right after another one of those dipping terms. What happened is these Baptist churches, they started to circulate. They started to see this kind of like decline in the hunger for God, awareness of God, and they literally just circulated these letters that basically just said, look, who cares about the programming, and who cares about the buildings, and who cares about the liturgy and all that kind of stuff? What we need is we just need pray. We just need to pray. We just need daily prayer meetings. That's what we need. They just circulated these letters asking for daily prayer meetings. And these letters circulated, and suddenly you have the Second Great Awakening percolating, where people are just like, look, let's just be on our knees and desperate for God and praying. That's what we need right now. In the city, in the region, in the nation. The layman's prayer revival in 1857, again, Christianity in decline because it's in the middle of and on the heels of the Civil War. So it's on the way down because it's like everything we put our hope in, every worldview we thought was right, everything that we thought was going to work, everything we thought was going to save us, it cannot answer for the current moment I'm in, my family's in, this city's in, this region's in, this nation's in. We're at the end of ourselves, of our own strength, of our own intellect, of our own ability to save ourselves, to create human progress. We can't do it. It's failing. And suddenly you have the layman's prayer revival where this guy named, I don't want to butcher it. Where is it in my notes? Jeremiah Lanphier. He invited 6 people in New York, September 23rd, 1857. He just found 6 people that were working with him. And he just said, look, let's just do something really simple. Let's just have these daily noon prayer meetings. Can we just get together at noon for like 30 minutes and just pray together, these 6 people? Not leaders in any churches, not like pastors or preachers or ordained in any way. They were just like lay people in churches. They just said, let's just get together and pray. They started inviting other people to it. It kind of gets a little big. They said, well, maybe you guys should just start another one, and those people start another one, and then those people start another one. Within half a year, there's thousands of these prayer meetings across the country, not just in the Northeast. And people are coming to faith. People are like having like miraculous encounters with God just through these like very basic, simple prayer meetings. Started by a guy over lunch for 30 minutes with a few coworkers. 1859, you got Ulster, Ireland. Revival started in 1859. Again, 4 fairly new converts that in Ireland in a time of great decline where they basically just said, let's just get together and pray every day. Let's just be desperate for let's ask God for revival. Let's ask God to be present in our city, in our neighborhood, in our families, in our workplaces, in our country, in the world. Let's just pray together. And eventually that little act spread to the UK. There's 100,000 converts. And again, every single one of these marked by a strange people, an awkward people, a weird people, committed to the work of prayer, committed to white-hot faith, committed to being desperate for God's presence. The Azusa Street Revival, coming on the heels of Reconstruction, 1906, the Azusa Street Revival, this fiery preacher, William Seymour, down in Los Angeles, little tent meeting. And again, these people just have a white-hot faith, desperate for prayer, very simple, hungry for God's presence, desperate for revival in their city, in their state, in their region, in the nation, in the world, and suddenly it gives birth to the Pentecostal movement, the modern Pentecostal movement, all over the place. Do you see a pattern? Do you see a pattern of God's expansive work in the world, of historical movements of revival? The way Mark Sayers describes it is with a metaphor of either breathing or of the tides of the ocean. That God actually breathes out, and His manifest presence is so powerful, so potent in the world. But as soon as people start to no longer hunger for His presence and actually trade away His leadership, trade away His salvation, trade away hope in Him for other versions of salvation, other hopes, other gods, other idols, other leaders, and no longer call upon His name, no longer are desperate for His presence, no longer are hoping in His power, the breath starts to come back in. That the tide comes into the world. But as soon as we start to trade away His salvation, His worthiness, His glory, His splendor for other idols, other worldviews, other hopes, suddenly the tide starts to recede. The presence starts to recede. The power starts to recede. And the question is, in a moment like this, in a moment that we're in, with the objective sense that we have about the cultural moment we're in, the question is, will God return? And the answer is, encouragingly, historically, yes. Yes, He will. And the answer theologically is yes. Yes, He will. Of course He will. But not until people run into the end of themselves. Not until the hope and the worldview and the idols that people are placing their trust in are proven to be empty. And people are left in a place where it's like, all the eggs that I put in that basket, it's all ruined. Everything that I staked my hope on, it proved to be empty. It could not deliver on what it promised, and even what it promised, if it could deliver it, was empty. When the tide is going out, when spiritual interest is declining, and animosity and immorality are increasing, when we're not just experiencing like a lack of openness, a lack of concern, a little bit of actual animosity. Some of that animosity actually deserved and earned by some of the things that have happened or been done in the name of Christianity that we have to actually own up and repent of and fess up to and try to repent of and live out in a real meaningful way. When the world is just like falling apart and faulting, crevicing. I mean, my goodness, wake up this morning and 2 shootings in 24 hours? This mass elevation of like normalization and desensitivity to death? And again, holding on, people who want to hold on to their rights in the midst of that? And idolize personal autonomy and freedom and rights, it's always a sign that people have traded away hope in the Lord and His way for an alternative hope. And that alternative way across the board, the alternative way that you're experiencing, I'm experiencing, as a microchurch you're experiencing, on campus you're experiencing, in any institution you're experiencing, that alternative hope, that alternative way right now is secularism. It's this entire salvation arc. When I say salvation arc, I mean like our worldview has a salvation arc where creation, the fall, redemption, glorification, and we have like the Garden of Eden. We have this way that we understand that God created us with a purpose and what that means, and we have like a worldview around that. And then there's sin. There's like something that broke that, and we inherited that. We operate in that. We're existing in that fallen state. But then God actually has a future plan, and here's what that future means, and here's what it looks like. And there's like a redemptive act. There's a redemptive character. There's a redemptive nature. There's a plan for that. That would be our salvation. You know, secularism has a salvation arc. Secularism, a worldview, actually has a meaning of life, a created purpose, a Garden of Eden. I would say that the meaning of existence in a secular worldview is for pleasure or happiness. The meaning of existence, the meaning of life, our created purpose, our Garden of Eden is for pleasure. Pleasure and happiness. It's the goal of all things. It's the hope of all things. It's where we run, it's what we fight for, it's what we align our lives to. And what's the fall? What's the sin? What is it that hinders us? What is it that broke us from that created purpose? The sin in a secular worldview is submission to anything. Submission to restrictions, submission to rules, submission to a truth that you have not agreed to. That's why like meta-truth or transcendent truth or absolute truth is so broken, because whether or not you agree with it, you actually have to submit to it. People don't want to submit. Submit to commitments in relationships, submit to friendships, submit to community. All of these things restrict our freedom to pursue pleasure and happiness. This is the great sin of the secular worldview, is submission of any kind. We want to maintain our own power, our own authority, our own freedom, our own autonomy over our own lives, and never submit to anything. What does the eternal kingdom look like for a secular worldview, that eternal future? It looks like the restoration of my freedom to be able to seek pleasure and happiness whenever I want, however much I want, in whatever way I want. That's what total restored humanity and future progress. It's the answer to all progress. It's the end goal of all progress, is full autonomous freedom to pursue pleasure in whatever way I want, however I want. And never have to be asked or need to meaningfully submit to anything or anyone or any reality that I do not choose. And how does the secular worldview get there? What's the Savior? What's the redemptive act, the redemptive purpose? Well, the redemptive act is self-discovery and autonomy. If I can just discover my true self, what actually pleases me and makes me happy, and then have the full self-autonomy to actually pursue those things, that's the redemptive act that will work toward this future. And if we can all just figure out how to do that with each other and coexist with each other as we all do that together, everything will be great. Let's do that. Come on, can't we do that? Come on. You see, secularism is a narrative of human progress and flourishing without God, without God's presence. It does not need God's power. It does not need His goodness. It does not need His love. It's a vision for life, a narrative about life working toward human progress and a version of life flourishing that does not require God. Sees Him as totally separate from this, inconsequential. And the question is, will secularism fail? And I actually think it already is. It already is. We see it failing every day. And I think what's happening is we've experienced for 10, 15, 20 years, we've experienced the tide go out. And right now it's starting to crescent and starting to come back in. It's starting to peak out and it's starting to come back. As people's hope in a secular worldview, as what people thought was going to be produced by a secular worldview starts to show itself as faulty. It cannot deliver what it promised to deliver. And even when it delivers it, it's not even worth it. And people's hope in that thing is starting to break. And they're reaching the end of themselves. And they're starting to scratch again and wonder again. and deconstruct some of that stuff that they've believed for so many years, and starting to, in the void of that, in the vacancy of that, then what is real? How do we move forward? What is hope? What do I hope in? What's the future hold? Why am I here? Why do I exist? And I think it means, like, we could think that we're on an inevitable decline. There's always going to be animosity. There's always going to be resistance. And we just have to stick it out as best we can and just survive. I don't actually think that's a true perspective of what's happening right here. I think we should be rolling up our pants, planted in the sand, and just saying, come on, water, come on, tide. Put my stuff up, get it out of the way of the tide, and then just go stand out there, plant ourselves in the sand, and saying, we're ready. Come on, water. Come on. And what does that mean for a missionary life? What does that mean for a missionary life? You see, I think secularism is the least equipped to deal with pain, suffering, and death. A secularism worldview does not know how to equip people on how to deal with pain, suffering, and death. And the world right now under secularism is failing. Every major institution produced by the age of secularism and that the age of secularism has had hope in is failing. Mass disappointment in the education system, mass disappointment and obvious examples of failure in the political system, mass disappointment and failure in the entertainment and celebrity domain, the Me Too movement, everything, the mass disappointment and brokenness in the military institution and system. The things that people put their hope in are failing them every single day. Every single day. And even, I want to be very careful here, even the institutional church, which has agreed with a secularist worldview, is now breaking and disappointing people. But in this kind of declining moment, certain church environments and church institutions which have decided, instead of holding firm, holding fast, but have decided to actually adopt the secularism worldview for the sake of like getting as many people in as possible and then maybe trying to help like work with them and disciple them, but have basically said, you're right, yeah, pleasure and happiness is the aim of all life. Correct. And we aren't going to don't worry, we're not going to hold you accountable to community. We're not going to ask you to submit to anything. We're not going to ask you to submit to anyone. We're not going to ask you to submit to accountability in any way or any standard of life because that's very restrictive and binding of you. We're not going to do that here. So you come, we'll preserve your freedom, we'll preserve your autonomy, we'll help you self-actualize and self-discover. And the more you self-discover, the more you can move towards self-fulfillment and pleasure and happiness. And even those institutions are now breaking. We're seeing like a mass breaking of that worldview. What does it mean for us as missionaries, as microchurch leaders, to have this is really good news. This is really good news. If you look at history, if you look at Scripture, if you look at the examples of like the early church in Acts 2, who's just sitting in that upper room and they're just desperate for God to come. They're not just running with their own ideas or their own strategies. They're just saying, God, we wait for you. We wait for you to come. We're desperate for you to come. They're praying. Or you look at Daniel in Babylon living in exile. That's a similar moment for us. We should be obsessed with Daniel right now. We should be obsessed with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego right now. We should be looking at those kinds of situations and saying, how are those leaders archetypes for a missionary life right now? And did those guys have a single concern for relevance? No. Weird. Did they have a concern for contextualization? You better believe it. Did they want to say things in a way that could actually be received in their current environment? Did they want to actually understand the environment they were in and trying to give the message of the gospel in a way that people could understand? Right, that's contextualism. Were they relevant? Did they fit in? Did they feel like safe and comfortable relationally? No, they were wild. Those guys were wild. They're like, you're going to kill me? You're going to throw me in that fire? That's fine. Whatever. I'm still not going to bow down to you. I'm just going to sit here and pray. Whatever. Throw me in there, I guess. See, Cyrus makes this edict. You can't pray anymore to other gods. And what does Daniel do? He says, I guess I'm just going to have to go pray about that. He goes straight to it. That is not relevant. Contextualized, yes. Relevant, no. I think we can actually learn from history and from these archetype examples, and even from that philosophy that Paul is giving. I did not come with eloquent words and persuasive speech. I came with a demonstration of the Spirit's power. I came with God's presence. I came asking for and leaning on the presence and power of God, and if He couldn't show up, then we weren't going to do anything. Nothing was going to happen. I think that these are how we learn as missionaries in microchurches, how to respond to the current moment we're in. So I just want to say a couple words about that. Worship team can come up, and I'll just end with a few practical things. I know you guys like when I get practical. I'll do that. I'll get very practical. I think this is all extremely, extremely good news for followers of Jesus. I've been extremely encouraged by considering the history of revival, considering the history of like a boom or bust economy and God's supernatural presence and power globally, and what it means for us, how it can inform our current moment. Completely reframes how we understand our current moment as missionaries and leaders in the city, and how to respond faithfully to what God is doing in our time. Because it means the current moment is not a reason to give up hope. It's actually a reason to have more. It's actually a reason to cling to more hope, to believe that what God is actually doing in our time. And He's actually in the process of allowing every false hope to be exposed as a false hope. And we're just sitting back ready. We're ready as it's all exposed. Let's be prepared for the return of the ocean, the same way every remnant of Jesus' followers has in history. Let's be prepared for the return of the tide in the same way that so many examples in history have been, by being committed to a strange life of desperate prayer and white-hot faith. Can we do that together? Can we be committed to a strange life of committed prayer and white-hot faith? We need strategies, we need plans, we need creativity and innovation. That's why we spent a whole weekend doing it, setting goals, thinking about our next step. We need all that, it's important, but all of it is meaningless and destined for failure without the presence of God hungered for, desperate for, asked for, interceded for, begged for, called upon, and acknowledged by a strange people marked by prayer and a fiery faith. See, God is inviting us to be a strange people, a radical people. There's not a single example. I looked at as many as I could this week. There's not a single example of like a revival moment in history that was started by irrelevant people. Not one. They were weirdos every time. Super strange. I'd have a hard time hanging out with them. Every single one of them. So can we commit to growing a little bit more comfortable with our strangeness, our set-apartness, our weirdness? Can we embrace it? And that's why it's so important for our whole community every year, at least once a year, to remember our manifesto values. Because if you live out the manifesto values of the underground even a little bit, you'll be weird. You'll be strange if you let people see you live it. To live obsessed with Jesus, and because of our obsession with Jesus, to always follow Him to the poor and the lost in our concern, in the direction of our lives, and to be fully committed and in submission to the truth of God's Word, obsessed with the Bible, writing it on our hearts and in submission to what it says. Riding the paradox of zeal and contemplation, while at the same time walking in prayer and dependence, and leaning on each other in community, empowerment, sharing and simplicity, to operate with a concern for the whole world, and to celebrate every culture and ethnicity, and look for the beauty of God represented in every culture and ethnicity, and have the audacity to prayer and open your heart to the whole world. If you live out these values just a little bit, you'll be weird. You'll be strange. It's important for us to remember them and to commit every year, together as a community, to commit to living out these values. It's not just an invitation to be a strange people, but an invitation to be a prayerful people. More organic and organized prayer. It's really on our heart. It's on the heart of the team. It's on the heart of the elder community to just have more spaces of organic and organized prayer together. We want to walk in the legacy of these revival moments in history that just started a little prayer meeting at noon on a Monday, and God came. And so we're there was a summer class that George and Demetrius ran on supernatural ministry, and over the course of 3 or 4 weeks, it basically just became like a prayer meeting, like just a place to invite the presence of God. And I think they just started realizing with that class this summer, there's something here. We got to keep doing this. We can't stop doing this. And so I think we're going to be starting to talk about how to make that, and how to continue making spaces like that for our community more frequently, so we can be diving into, not be abstractly committed to the labor of prayer and revival together, but to actually be really concretely committed to it. And I want to be specific about the type of prayer I'm talking about here. Not necessarily travel mercies. Travel mercies are good. We can pray for travel mercies. But the prayer of the saints of revival is something different. I was 3, 4, 5 years ago, I was at a restaurant with my family. It was an Italian restaurant, family-style Italian restaurant. I think it was called Buca di Beppo. Is that a thing? Yeah. So we were there. It was up in Chicago. We get toward the end of the meal. My whole family. I've got 2 brothers, a sister. My parents, my wife was with us. We get toward the end of the meal, and I think we were telling a story, and my dad was taking a drink. He started laughing, and he started choking. He started choking on this piece of ice, I think. And we were all he's choking, and we're all just laughing at him. So funny, unbelievable. He could barely breathe. It's hilarious. And then he actually just went unconscious and fell on the ground. And I was on the opposite side of the table, and I just jumped over the table and got on top of him and just started slamming his chest. This is not actually how you do CPR, but I just started slamming his chest. And his eyes are wide open glazed. He didn't shut his eyes. He's just unconscious, wide, and his mouth is open. And I just think he's choking. He can't breathe. I'm just slamming his chest as hard as I can. Nothing happening. And then I literally just take his body and I try to sit him up and get behind him and try to start doing the Heimlich maneuver on him. I've never done the Heimlich. It was the worst Heimlich maneuver probably anybody's ever done. And I just start screaming at the top of my lungs, "Help! Help, 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 help!" And the whole restaurant just stopped. Everybody, it's like this family style, everybody's having fun or whatever. Everybody stops and everybody's just staring at us. We're sitting on the floor. And he's in between my legs, and and I'm behind him, and I'm hugging him. I'm trying to give him the Heimlich maneuver. And everybody's just silent. Nobody's helping. I'm like, "Help! What are you doing? Somebody do something." And I'm just giving him the Heimlich as much as he can. And then suddenly while I'm giving, and I'm like, he's gone. This had been 2 minutes at this point. And I'm just thinking, my dad's dead in my arms. And he just suddenly takes his hand. He's sitting here, and he starts just patting my leg. And I think what had happened was he wasn't actually choking on anything. He had coughed so hard for so long that there wasn't oxygen going to the brain. So he just passed out. And he just kind of slowly came awake, and he's sitting on the floor, and I'm sitting behind him, and I'm hugging him from behind. And everybody in the restaurant is staring at us very quietly, and he's like, "What is going on here? What is..." And he's like, "Man, I don't know what happened, but I'm fine. We're good." And I was so mad at everything. I was mad at him for no reason. What did he do? But I was mad at him. I was mad at my family because they just sat there. I was mad at the whole restaurant. I was mad at the waitress who just sat there or whatever. I was like, what are we doing here? What are we doing? I was just thinking this week about when these histories of people who are praying for God, praying for revival, desperate prayers, praying for God's presence. The history of moments of that, and what I'm asking us as a community, a citywide network, to commit to this year, to walk in this year, is those kinds of prayers. Prayers that are saying, "God, help. Help. We need you now. Help. Come now. Help." Because that's actually more accurate to the reality of what's happening than any other version of prayer. that people are actually facing. Guys, we're supposed to be beating our hands through the gates of hell. We're supposed to be in the throes of a life or death battle here. And to say, God, we cannot go another 5 minutes without you here now. Now, God, now. Now, we need you now. Maranatha, come now. Please, God. To beg him. God is inviting us to be a strange people, an interceding people, a prayerful people, a desperate people, a begging people. And he's inviting us to a high call, high commitment, uncompromising faith, a white-hot faith, a fiery faith. And you just cannot sustain that kind of faith. You cannot sustain that kind of hunger on your own. You cannot do it. You can't do it. We have to do it together. We have to commit to it together. We have to walk with one another together. We have to spur each other on together. And that's why every year at Leadership Summit, toward the end of our time together, we recommit to each other. We recommit to the values, the strange life described in the manifesto, and we commit again to each other. We commit to each other to a white-hot faith, to a desperate faith, a desperate life with each other. And all the community of ordained elders already did this a couple weeks ago. We did it with each other, but like we do every year, if anybody, whether you're an ordained elder, whether you're like a brand new microchurch that's been here for 2 weeks or something, you barely know us, whether you're like a missionary-hearted person, and you've stumbled your way in here, you can commit to this. You can actually sign on the line. We've got this little paper up here, which is basically just a summarize of like the leadership commitments here. Basically the white-hot faith, desperate, committed to each other, living out the values. And if your heart is like, this is what I want, this is who I want to be, this is the kind of community I want to do it with, then come. And I'm going to give us some time here. I'm going to give us some time to pray, a moment to consider, a moment to discern. And if that's you, if you're a microchurch leader in the movement, it's an important time for us. We're used to doing this together. It's a sacramental moment for us. But if you're new, if you've barely been around, but your heart's just burning, like, I want that too, I want to live that way too, God is asking me to live that way too, then come. So I'd love for you to stand. I want to pray for all of us. I'd love to pray with you together. Basically, there's this leadership commitment up here. And if you just feel like what we've talked about this morning is just resonating with you,